everyone. Welcome to the Climate Activation Hub. I'm delighted to be your host today. I'm Audrey Cynthia Yamajako. I work for the African Development Bank as a Climate and Environmental Finance Officer. I'm here today on the 7th to talk about ABM, Adaptation Benefit Mechanism. The objective is to let you know more about what ABM is, and also if you will like to invest your corporate social responsibility budget in ABM, in an adaptation benefit mechanism. And we will also want to, at the end of this session, we'll go to a vote, and so you will decide if you will prefer to invest in an adaptation project with mitigation co-benefits, or in a mitigation project with adaptation co-benefits. First, today I'm delighted to introduce my prestigious panel. We have Gareth Phillip, manager of the climate, he's manager of the climate environmental division, finance division at the African Development Bank. We have as well Axel Mikhailova, who is senior partners of Perspective, Climate Perspective Groups, and we have also Ndiaye Dauda, from the Islamic Development Bank, who is also in charge of the climate and environmental finance. Thank you very much, and I will give you the floor to Gareth.
Great, thank you very much. You can see this is going to be a high energy event, even though there's only a small number of us here. But I'm delighted that you've all taken the time to come. Sadly, I know almost everybody in the room, but I think three faces I don't recognize. But anyway, great to have you here. So my name is Gareth. I'm the manager of Climate and Environmental Finance, and I am an adaptation convert. Now, we're doing great things for mitigation, but I believe that by 2050 we will have achieved the mitigation goals of the Paris Agreement. In my most optimistic moments, I can foresee that we will actually shut down the last coal-fired power plant by 2050, which is great news because it shows that the Paris Agreement can encourage and motivate action to achieve an environmental goal. The sad thing is that in 2050, in countries like Kenya, it's going to be 2 degrees warmer. So the disasters, the climate disasters that you hear about every day now in the news are going to be happening all over the place. We're going to have untold disasters and misery, and people getting pushed into poverty, marginalization, radicalization, migration, all driven by this changing climate. And this is what we mean when we talk about adaptation, helping people adapt to climate change. And it is critically important, because if we don't do this, then we're going to find ourselves, okay, we'll be nice and green and living off renewable energy, but hundreds of millions of people are going to be suffering from their need to adapt to that. And actually, it's not just in developing countries, because you see it happening in developed countries as well. The difference is, of course, they have the insurance instruments and the mechanisms to respond. So the Paris Agreement contains a clause that says parties will endeavour to balance investment in adaptation and mitigation. But what we see is that investment in climate finance is by far in favour of mitigation. Why is that? Well, the answer is quite simple. It's very difficult to get a cash flow out of an adaptation project. If you build a flood defence, it delivers public goods. It protects hundreds of thousands or millions of people from flood waters, but you can't make any money out of it. And typically, these things are done by governments using public money or grants. And there's not very much of that kind of money around. And the private sector doesn't get involved because they can't make any money out of it. Now, the ABM specifically seeks to address this problem by creating a project cycle that generates certified adaptation benefits. And these certified adaptation benefits are designed to be purchased by developed country governments, corporates and consumers to use to demonstrate their contribution towards meeting the costs of adaptation in developing countries. Now, if we can provide a source of revenue to an adaptation project developer, then they can go to a bank and borrow money to build the project. And that is the crux of the problem. Without cash flow, you can't borrow money to build the project. With cash flow, suddenly all kinds of things become possible. And that's what we've seen in the mitigation markets with carbon credits and so on. And we want to do the the same kind of thing with the adaptation benefits for the topic of adaptation. So we've created the ABM Executive Committee. We've got 2 members are going to speak to you in a minute. We host the Secretariat at the African Development Bank. We have some methodology panels. We're running a pilot program, and our next goal is to create the African Adaptation Benefit Fund, which is going to sign purchase agreements for adaptation benefits and kickstart the process, a little bit like the World Bank Prototype Carbon Fund did for the CDM. Now, that's the end of my quick presentation. We're going to show you a 3-minute whiteboard animation that explains how the ABM works. So hopefully the IT is going to cue the whiteboard. Thank you very much. We need volume.
Climate change. It will help to. The adaptation benefits mechanism is a gift from African experts to all regions vulnerable to climate change. It will help to raise public and private sector finance for implementing the Paris Agreement on climate change. The African Development Bank is piloting the ABM in Africa with demonstration projects and institutional arrangements. An independent ABM executive committee with mainly African experts to develop its rulebook. Uganda, Cote d'Ivoire, Eswatini, and Kenya championed the ABM in the intergovernmental climate change negotiations under the United Nations. The ABM aims to achieve for adaptation what the carbon markets have been achieving for mitigation already for more than 20 years. Billions of new investments and countless new clean and sustainable projects. Africa is already suffering from the negative impacts of climate change, which are expected to increase in frequency and magnitude over the next decades. However, the adaptation area is lagging behind mitigation in almost all technical, financial, and policy aspects. Currently, adaptation finance is mainly public and grant-based and is not enough to meet the needs and priorities of African countries. Many good adaptation projects do not have access to climate finance, either because they deliver to the public good and do not generate enough revenues, or because they target the most poor and vulnerable communities which do not have enough means to pay back commercial loans. The ABM offers a solution. Recognize and monetize the impacts and co-benefits of adaptation action for people, nature, and sustainable economic development. The ABM certifies all adaptation impacts and co-benefits following a well-tested model that has already been used successfully for mitigation. The ABM helps to fill the gap for robust adaptation metrics and indicators by introducing methodologies and verification. This brings adaptation closer to the level of development and mitigation area. A certified adaptation benefit delivers a package of project-specific, quantified, and verified information on progress towards resilience, co-benefits, and climate finance. Such information is currently scarce. It is needed for reporting by those who want to contribute to climate change adaptation and finance, governments, impact investors, and the private sector. We count on the commitment to achieving resilience for all faster to make the ABM work together. By engaging new actors, tapping on new source of finance, and improving access to finance, the ABM contributes to achieving a paradigm shift towards low emissions, climate resilient, and sustainable development. If you want to contribute, participate, or know more, visit www.abmechanism.org.
Thank you very much. What a promising mechanism to give more opportunity for project developer in adaptation, but also for corporate who are willing to invest their budgets in ABM project and ABM results. So please I will give the floor to Mr. Dauda to give us his perspective of the ABM. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming. Look, yes. For mitigation, it has been quite simple. Greenhouse gas is the main metrics. For adaptation, is a whole range of metrics that need to be accounted for, and this is very, very, very critical, and it has been quite challenging to really go down to measuring the outcomes of adaptation activities. So what the adaptation benefit mechanism is trying to do is quite groundbreaking here.
The adaptation benefit.
And making sure that the whole mechanism is credible is key. This is why we have the Adaptation Executive Committee that has been established. We have a methodology panel that is looking at addressing the methodologies that are going to be submitted to the mechanism, and then a roster of experts that help in looking at each methodology submitted, and that will be used for the benefits, adaptation benefits certificates. So the key phase of this pilot mechanism at this stage is to make sure that at the end we get to a credible adaptation benefit mechanism. So far, when you look at the different metrics that could be used for this mechanism, it could go from project level to metrics that have been identified at the national level through the NDC. So there is a wide range of metrics that can be used. So now, really, if you look at where the adaptation money is going at this stage, mainly it's through the governments going to different areas through the ministries, etc. But the private sector, the local communities, the NGOs, they have little access to adaptation finance. So it's a very good opportunity here when the mechanism is established and that adaptation benefit certificates can be provided to these local communities, these NGOs, and these private sector institutions. It will really help in increasing the level of adaptation finance that goes to Africa. So now it's really a very exciting opportunities that we have here. And there are already a few methodologies that the methodology panel that I am chairing, and Axel is co-chairing as well. Very exciting methodologies that have been submitted to the methodology panel. And there's already one that has been approved, and we're looking forward to approving a few more. So this is really a good start, and hopefully with the establishment of the fund, it will really help in maybe kickstarting the whole process, and then hoping that in the future, donors and corporate responsibility is going to come in to help in putting money in this very exciting mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dauda, for all this explanation. And we will have Axel now, Naidenova, who will give us a practical example and to increase your understanding of how ABM works and how you could invest your CSR in adaptation. Please, Axel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can I get the remote device, please? Yeah, just to say, I'm not Lucy Naidenova, who is from the Secretariat. I'm Axel Michaelova from Perspectives. And can you bring up? Yeah, so we are in the activation hub. So we want to activate. And as you've heard, so far we have gaps. We have gaps in the context of adaptation. Adaptation finance has been scarce. The public international climate finance adaptation is still in the 20% range. It's coming up slowly, but really slowly. And what we, of course, now see, we have a global goal of adaptation under the Paris Agreement. It's being negotiated, but the negotiations are difficult. Dauda has mentioned the issue of metrics. And of course, so far, we don't know what actually is the global goal of adaptation. And I would hope, I have dreams, that the governments make a clear commitment on a certain metric for the global goal of adaptation, and that then every government sets up policy instruments to actually promote adaptation. And that under such policy instruments, we would then have private action, because you see under mitigation, we wouldn't see any private action if governments wouldn't put mitigation policies. And we need the same for adaptation. And of course, these policies then need to be underpinned by credible activities. And the key aspect now of the adaptation benefit mechanism is that it generates that credibility, that we have a science-based process of assessing the adaptation benefits. You've seen Dauda chairing the METH panel, myself also working in the METH panel, and we really put an emphasis in understanding what is an adaptation benefit. And of course, it's not as easy as in mitigation, where you have CO2 equivalent. In adaptation, you will have various classes of adaptation benefits, but still we want to have the same rigor that a private investor actually can credibly say to his shareholders, to his board, to the general public, to the government, we have invested and we have achieved certain adaptation benefits. And then, of course, we would get into a virtuous cycle. We would have the governments that set the adaptation targets and that prioritize action. We have the private sector that now, through the metrics and the approaches of the adaptation benefit mechanism, can actually show that they achieve these benefits. And then we would have a virtuous circle of trust building, that in 10 years from now, nobody would again talk about an adaptation gap. That we would have the same level of attention on the policy level and the private sector level to address adaptation through tested methodologies that, of course, learn over time. We will have failures, but we will learn. We've seen in mitigation that over 20 years of carbon markets, there was a lot of learning, and we would hope that under the adaptation benefit mechanism, we'll get the same learning. But for this, we need private sector activities. Again, the motto of the Activation Hub: get to us, discuss with us what type of methodologies would be relevant for you. We were quite happy that here in the East African context, we could get a methodology for cold storage of potatoes. With climate change, we have a warming. We have more rotting of potatoes. So the cold storage would prevent that rotting. And we have a nice way now to look at how much rotting is actually prevented, and rotting that is due to climate change, not just to natural variability. So, again, if you are private sector representative, come and see the Secretariat. I'm looking forward to those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Axel, and sorry for calling you Lucy. Lucy Naidenova is also part of the ABM Secretariat, and she's doing also a great job on promoting this important mechanism. And thank you, Axel. So you can really see that ABM is giving the transparency we all need to do those kind of investment. And we will want to have to take some time to answer to your question. So please raise your hands if you have some question. We'll be happy to. Our panelists will be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Patience Mkuyu. I'm a policy analyst at WaterAid. I was very excited to hear about this because, of course, adaptation is lagging behind, and it addresses some of the pressing social ills that we face today. So I wanted to ask about these adaptation certificates in terms of how do you judge in terms of the benefits that what is the scope in terms of time that you say, okay, this benefit is going to mature at this point, therefore it is a benefit that we can invest in. I'm saying this from the water and sanitation sector, where there are multiple ripple effect benefits that can be achieved from investing in water and sanitation systems. But right now we're seeing very little investment in those, particularly for those communities that kind of lead their own community self-supply systems and have to do it by themselves outside of formal municipal systems, for example. So I'd like to understand how you kind of look at benefits from that. Because right now we know that if we invest in wash systems, we get better health benefits, and therefore it also affects the fiscal budget that goes into the health sector. So how do you kind of look at these benefits long and short term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patience. Let me respond to that directly, and then we may have time for another one. So this is very good, and you outlined in your question the basis of a theory of change, where you have the input, the output, the outcomes, and the impacts. So the adaptation benefit mechanism, the methodology process, builds off that theory of change. And what we're looking for is strong links in the theory of change that allow us to put faith in the delivery of outputs and outcomes that we know in the future will lead to impacts. And if we can do that, then it means we can base the certified adaptation benefits for that particular technology on the delivery of those particular outputs and outcomes. And that's important because we know we get outputs and outcomes faster. They don't take so long to come. If you wait for the impacts, you may have to wait 10 years. We know that outputs and outcomes are easier and cheaper to measure and verify, generally speaking, whereas impacts are much more, well, they happen on a much larger scale and they're much harder and more costly to quantify. So the whole idea is that we find cheap and simple outputs and outcomes that we are confident will lead to the impacts that we're seeking. And then we price the adaptation benefits at such a way that we return the investment to the investor over as short a period of time as possible to reduce the risks, to reduce the financing costs, and to enable the developer to get their money back and move on and do the next project instead of having to wait 10 years to get their money before they move on. But let's talk about it more afterwards, and see if there's another question.
Thank you very much for this question. It's really important. This mechanism will provide more interest in those projects who are providing a lot of benefits for the population and the society. So that's why we need a mechanism to make those projects more attractive and also bankable for the project developer, but also for the financial institution who are going to fund them. Please, do you have another question? We will be happy to answer. We have this panelist who has a certain impressive experience in adaptation and who are so knowledgeable. So I invite you to ask your question because it's a great opportunity to have them here. No more question? Yes.
Well, if there are no questions, I can, of course, come up with a question. My name is Lucy Njuguna. I work with the International Livestock Research Institute, and I'm just wondering, especially with the model that you've taken, that you have a group that is looking at methodologies, what can be the role of research in informing how we even measure the adaptation benefits? Thank you.
Yeah, let me come into that, because I'm not only from the consultancy sector. Perspectives is having, of course, a private consultancy arm, but I'm also a researcher at University of Zurich. And I've published over the last 15 years on adaptation metrics. It's a highly contested subject because there are those that say, yeah, adaptation is so different from mitigation, you can't actually measure it. And you should have, if you develop somehow, then you achieve an adaptation benefit. And then there are those, myself including, who say there can be specific definitions of adaptation benefit. You can, for example, denominate benefits that directly relate to human life and illness in the context of the so-called disability-adjusted life years. That's a concept that is run by the World Health Organization. It is now well accepted in the public health sector. And similarly, of course, you can look at damages that accrue to extreme event, to property, that you can denominate in terms of monetary values. You can then, of course, have other types of benefits. For example, in water scarce areas, you can have benefits that are denominated in cubic meters of water that are made available compared to the baseline situation. So there are various means and also research-tested means to look at adaptation, and we should not just give up and say adaptation can't be measured. It can. We've seen in the past in mitigation that measurement initially also was thought to be difficult, but now over 20 years we've collected experience with hundreds of methodologies, and I think this can be replicated in adaptation as well on a scientifically sound basis.
Thank you very much, Axel.
Good morning. I'm sorry I came late, but when I was passing, I heard the word adaptation. So I decided to turn and came here. The reason being, I work with the community here in Kenya. And the word adaptation, I'm finding it hard to communicate adaptation to the communities. How will you help me to communicate adaptation to communities? Because it is more easy to tell them about mitigation than adaptation. Really, because if the communities are finding it hard to, even the word itself on how do you survive, and it is quite expensive to really communicate that.
Thank you very much. Let me answer that. That's very interesting to hear you say that you think it's easier to explain mitigation to a community than to adaptation. Actually, my view would be that it's quite the other way around. What a farmer thinks about a ton of carbon dioxide, I don't know. What a woman working over a three-stone cooking, thinks about tons of CO2, I don't know. But if you tell them that we can help you adapt to climate resilient agriculture so that you can find out when the rains are coming and you can plant different crops and have different income streams, or you can improve the time management by transitioning from a wood-fired or manure-fired stove to a clean cook stove, and this will free up your time to enable you to do other productive activities. For me, that's a much easier sale than to try to convince somebody, oh, if you do this thing, it's going to increase the amount of carbon that's stored in the soil that you're going to be able to sell on the international markets to a corporation in Europe who's going to use it to offset their emissions and tell their shareholders about it. But maybe you have different experience with your communities. But that's what we see as the appeal of the adaptation benefits mechanism. It speaks to local people, to communities, to rural people, households, to actually talk about the things that make a difference to their lives instead of trying to do it through this somewhat arbitrary concept of a ton of CO2. So what we hope is that the adaptation benefit mechanism will enable micro, small and medium enterprises to access resources to build adaptation projects. There are 44 million micro, small and medium enterprises in sub-Saharan Africa. If even 1% of those wanted to access climate finance, can you imagine of an instrument that could cope with that volume of interest and channel funds? Certainly the finance instruments that we have at the moment can't do that, but we think the adaptation benefits mechanism, which is based on the project cycle of the clean development mechanism, has that ability to cope with large numbers of small-scale projects, and this helps us speak to the kinds of communities that you're dealing with. Let me hand back to Audrey, because I think we need to move to our vote.
Thank you very much. I mean, you can see with the quality of the question that there is a lot of interest, and it's really important that we showcase how ABM works. So let's go to our vote. So now, if you have a budget and you would like to invest your corporate social responsibility budget, will you invest in a project? First people who raise your hand is the one who are willing to invest their budget in a mitigation project with co-benefit, with adaptation co-benefits. Please raise your hand. Great. For the other one who are willing to invest their budget in an adaptation project with mitigation co-benefits, please raise your hands. Fantastic. So please, please give yourself a round of applause. I think now we are coming to the end of this Activation Hub.
Yes, thank you very much, Audrey. Thank you for chairing us. So we take it from the vote that we've managed to convince you all that adaptation with mitigation co-benefits is as good as, or maybe better than, doing mitigation with adaptation co-benefits. So we hope that in the coming years we will see growth and interest, maybe even the creation of the adaptation benefit under Article 6.8, and this will create a stream of cash flow to come into the adaptation sector to try to level up the finance that we see with mitigation. Thank you very much indeed for coming today and for your attention.